improvise, adapt, and overcome.
Iranian ceasefire. It's still alive on paper, but paper does not stop missiles, and paper does not calm men with weapons in their hands. As of April 9th, this thing is under visible strain. It's not dead. It's not exactly stable. It is strained. The talks are still moving. The violence is too. And for many people, that is the problem. Right now, there are 3 live fractures running through this so-called ceasefire. First, Lebanon. Second, the Strait of Hormuz. And third, the fact that Washington and Tehran are still talking like they agreed to 2 different deals. That is the real picture. The diplomatic lane is still open. Iranian officials are moving toward Islamabad. Pakistani officials say American and Iranian delegations are arriving for talks meant to turn this 2-week pause into something more durable. Now that matters. It means neither side has fully walked away yet, but let's not romanticize it. The reason the ceasefire is still breathing is not because it is solid. It is because the political class is still trying to build the aircraft while flying through turbulence. An analogy which I really don't like, by the way, but I'm using it. And Lebanon is where the wings are shaking up. Now it extends even more. European officials are now openly saying Lebanon has to be included in the truce if the broader pause is going to hold. Now, translate that out of diplomatic language and into plain English, American if you please. If one front stays hot, the whole thing can come apart. That is the stress fracture of this whole deal. That is the weak seam. And Israel, not exactly behaving like it thinks this crisis is over. It is behaving like it thinks freedom of action still applies. If the strike on Hezbollah leadership in Beirut is confirmed, that is not background noise. That is a strategic decapitation strike against Iran's premier regional proxy, while the wider U.S.-Iran ceasefire is supposed to be stabilizing. Now that tells you everything. One side is talking pause, while another side is still talking pressure. Then you move south to Hormuz, and the same logic shows up in another form. Iran is still using maritime pressure as leverage. Restrictions, disruptions, threat of restriction, managed passage, whatever label you want to put on it, the effect is the same. Hormuz remains a coercive lever. That means that this is not just a military ceasefire problem, it is an energy problem. It is a shipping problem. It is a market confidence problem. It is a reminder that Tehran does not need to win a fleet engagement to raise the price of instability. It just needs to make every tanker captain and every insurance market ask one very ugly question. How safe is safe enough? Then, of course, there is Washington. The American line has hardened again. The public posture remains coercive. Stay in position until Tehran complies. If Tehran does not honor the deal, then the shooting starts again. At the same time, the core nuclear dispute remains unresolved. Washington is still acting like Iran accepted hard limits. Tehran is still acting like enrichment remains allowed. That is not resolution. That is collision course language wearing ceasefire clothing. So, what do we call this? It's not peace, it's certainly not stability, and it's absolutely not a clean ceasefire. What we have is a contested pause, a political lid on a battlefield that is still hot, a ceasefire sustained more by diplomatic desire than by operational coherence. Washington is still acting as if Tehran accepted compliance terms, where Tehran is acting as if the ceasefire is conditional on broader regional restraint, especially in Lebanon. Europe is signaling that the ceasefire cannot survive unless Lebanon is folded in. Israel is signaling it reserves the freedom of action regardless of the label. Those are not small differences. Those are four very different wars of interpretation being fought under one word. And that word is ceasefire. Now, here is the part that a lot of us don't understand until they watch this happen enough times. Ceasefires are almost always messy. Just ask the Palestinians. They are confused, they are violent, and they are full of contradictory statements and a lot of mutual accusations. Now, that does not automatically mean they are fake. What it means is that war does not stop cleanly just because leaders say it should. Command and control may already be degraded. Radios are down. Networks are hit. Units are scattered. And a lot of orders move unevenly. Some commanders get the word late. Some get partial guidance. Some assume the message is deception and keep operating. I mean, there were Japanese soldiers in Guam for decades before they got the actual belief that the war was ending. I mean, I'm talking about World War II, by the way. Not every armed actor is under one neat chain of command. You have state militaries, you have intelligence services, proxy militias, local commanders, you have naval elements, air defense crews, and a lot of political factions with their own agendas. Even if leadership agrees to pause, not every trigger puller is informed or controlled or even willing for that matter. And one thing I've learned is that combat has inertia. Aircraft already launched do not disappear, and the missiles already fired do not exactly reverse themselves. Artillery fires may already be cued. Convoys could be moving under old orders, and they don't stop on a dime. So the first hours of a ceasefire are often a collision between new political language and old military momentum. And well, then comes the fear, because nobody wants to be the sucker. Nobody wants to be the first unit to cool off and then get schwacked. So weapons stay hot, sensors are still active, a lot of nerves stay fried, and in that atmosphere, every ambiguous contact looks hostile. Every explosion is deliberate, and every delay in compliance reads like betrayal. Then you add ambiguity in scope. Does the ceasefire only apply to the United States and Iran? Does it cover proxies? Does it cover Lebanon? What about maritime interdictions or drone attacks, cyber operations, or covert action? If the political language is vague, the battlefield fills the gap with blood, and then, of course, you get spoilers. You always get spoilers. Hardliners, proxy groups, rival factions, outside actors, men who profit from escalation, institutions that fear peace more than war. Some of them want the ceasefire to fail. Some of them need it to fail. A single strike can collapse trust before the ink is dry. So when you see violations early, confusion early, contradictory public statements early, understand what you are looking at. You are watching a disordered transfer from combat operations to political control. That is what ceasefires usually are in the beginning. A lot of smoke, very little clarity. And this specific one was always going to be worse than most because this conflict has multiple fronts. A lot of proxies, in fact, multiple proxies, greatly disputed scope, very deep mutual distrust, and different public definitions of what was agreed upon in the first place, and several actors who may see strategic value in testing the limits before any frameworks harden. And that is exactly what is happening now. This is not just confusion, it is a lot of boundary pushing. My kids are good at that too. Each side is learning what it can still do without collapsing the deal. Israel is testing operational freedom in Lebanon. Iran is testing leverage in Hormuz. And Washington is testing coercive messaging while still keeping talks alive. Europe is testing whether diplomacy can widen the box fast enough to contain the fire. So the next 24 to 72 hours matter more than the original announcement ever did, because the announcement was theater. The framework is the test. If Islamabad produces real written terms, if there is actually clarity on the scope, or if Lebanon gets folded into the arrangement, if some credible mechanism appears for verification and restraint, then maybe this thing hardens. But if that does not happen, then what we are watching is not peace. It is an intermission. It is a breath between blows, a pause that gives everybody just enough time to reload politically, reposition militarily, and prepare the narrative for the next round. And that is the read. The ceasefire is fragile. It is narrowing, and it's under a lot of visible stress, but it's not dead. It is surviving because both sides still want talks, not because the battlefield has suddenly accepted the logic of peace. And unless diplomacy outruns violence fast, this thing will not be remembered as a settlement. It will be remembered as a pause between rounds. I would be remiss if I did not mention that the freshest battlefield details may still move, especially around claims tied to Lebanon, Hormuz, and the exact shape of the delegations on their way to Islamabad. The tactical details may shift, but this strategic picture probably will not. And with that, I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's SITREP edition of the Carry On podcast with me, Brad Colbert, the Iceman, for the week of April 9th. I want to thank some of our newest Patreon supporters, Jacob and Overlord 1776. Great handle, by the way. Thanks to you both and all of you who help make this show possible. I also want to correct the name of one of our supporters from last week that I pronounced incorrectly. To Aza or Aza, I'm covering both bases. Thank you. Thank you for supporting the show, and I appreciate the opportunity to thank you properly. Now, tonight, I'm going to talk about the CIA's involvement in the recovery of the F-15 Strike Eagle's weapons systems officer who was downed over Iran. I'm still not able to read anywhere in the mechanism it was brought down by, but there are still things worth reviewing. I also want to talk more about Israel's campaign in Lebanon and its oversized effect on the ceasefire. And we will talk about the latest drone warfare in Ukraine, and specifically citing a recent article that General David Petraeus did with CBS on his return from Ukraine. And we'll end tonight's discussion with Iran's block and toll of the Strait of Hormuz. Beverage for tonight is water. In case those of you want something a little, more exciting than regular water, this is sparkling water. Ugh. And it's flavored sparkling water, which makes it magically delicious. So I wanted to talk a moment about the recovery of the F-15 weapons officer in Iran and the technology that was surrounding it. Because a lot of what we saw, and it was a huge footprint in rescuing this individual, and rightfully so. We don't want to leave somebody behind, but even the President of the United States let slip that there was a unique technology. And of course, the internet lost its mind, and everybody put on an extra layer of tinfoil hat. And anytime the CIA is mentioned in any story, the tinfoil shares go through the roof. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the rescue, their involvement. I'm not going to get into the exact mechanics of what took place because it's all open source. You can look into that yourself. But I did want to speak about the CIA's involvement. So what we know is that the rescue was absolutely real and that the CIA's role was real. This deception campaign that they used is real. But what is still soft is the gadget folklore. And this is what I'm tracking. So an American F-15E goes down in Iran One crew member, the pilot, gets pulled out immediately, and the second one did not. Later, it was discovered that he was wounded. He was isolated, hiding in mountainous terrain. And of course, the clock is definitely working for Iran. So every hour that he stays on the ground increases his odds of capture, exploitation, propaganda, and a lot of strategic embarrassment. You'll notice that the administration's Tuesday at midnight deadline did not go into effect until that second aviator was recovered, because I have no doubt that had he been dragged through the streets alive or dead, it would have been a very different tweet that the president put out, but it didn't play out that way. So let's stick to what did. The United States basically does what it always does when it's having one of its own people behind enemy lines. It built this massive recovery machine involving air cover, special operations, SEAL Team 6 specifically, a lot of EW jamming, route denial. There were bombs dropped, intelligence support, and then critically, a CIA deception effort designed to throw Iranian searchers off the trail long enough for American forces to find him first. Now, that's all confirmed. That part matters more than the code name people are obsessing over, and that code name is Ghost Murmur. The public story is saying Ghost Murmur is some new CIA-linked tool that helped locate the missing airman, allegedly by detecting the electromagnetic signature of a human heartbeat, possibly using nitrogen, vacancy, diamond sensors, and AI filtering. No, seriously. It constitutes a next-generation, high-sensitivity quantum technology capable of detecting extremely weak magnetic fields at room temperature, such as those produced by electrical activity in the human body or remote electronic devices. Look it up. There's a lot of source material on this. This combination addresses the high background noise inherent in diamond sensing, enhancing signal detection in ambient conditions. Trump publicly said the tool was very important. Okay, great. That tells you the administration wants the name out there. But don't confuse public mention with public proof. The rescue has hard reporting behind it. The full technical mythology around this Ghost Murmur does not. And this is where tinfoil starts being made. Because once a story sounds futuristic enough, a lot of people stop asking whether the physics actually cash the check the headline is writing. I looked into this quite a bit over the last couple of days, and the technology, it's there, it's real, it's a thing, it's not science fiction, but the public research shows that these NV quantum sensors, although they can detect human cardiac magnetic signals, the published work shows detection in a controlled or semi-controlled condition with a lot of heavy noise suppression and averaging across many heartbeats. That is a very different universe from finding one wounded man in Iranian mountains full of interference, uncertainty, terrain masking, and a shitload of time pressure. So the smart read on this one is not that Ghost Murmur is fake. The smart read is that the cartoon version is probably fake. And if Ghost Murmur is real, it's probably not a magic heartbeat sniffing, floating over the battlefield like a science fiction bloodhound. It's probably more likely one node inside of a lot of fused recovery stack. I'm talking survivors' beacon data. The pilots have things that emit radio frequency energy that friendly forces can recover. ISR collection is in that stack. A lot of satellite terrain analysis, a lot of timing windows, and yeah, maybe some specialized sensing, probably some AI-assisted filtering. And let's not forget that CI deception. That layer bought a lot of time for the rescue to take place because it created a lot of fog of war, a lot of confusion on the Iranians' part, and they were, looking in the wrong place. We do deception operations like this quite successfully, and there's entire groups of people, the CIA amongst them, whose job it is to create deceptions like this. So all of this bought time, while the rest of the aforementioned machine closed in. And the explanation, although much less sexy, it's exactly why it's probably closer to the truth. What does all this imply? Well, it firstly implies that the United States is trying to move beyond old school search and rescue logic, not just find the radio, not just wait for the flare or, hope he keys the beacon again. I think that the direction of travel is obvious. You find the person even when he is hurt or quiet or hiding. And in this case, deep in denied territory. And that's a serious shift for our CSAR architecture. Even a modest improvement there changes a lot of our people's survival odds. It increases the recovery timeline and degrades enemy decision cycles. And I think secondly, it implies the American personal recovery model is becoming much more integrated, much more ruthless. There's a lot of intelligence, deception, a lot of electronic warfare, this time special operations and air power. They're no longer separate lanes. They were all integrated, and they were integrated quite successfully. They're now operating as one system. I think that the public wants desperately to believe one secret gadget saved the day. And that's not reality. The reality is the system or systems saved the day. Tradecraft in many ways saves the day. And a lot of the time that the CIA's deception helped save the day. Third, I think it implies this leak or partial disclosure is itself a message. I mean, not just to Iran, but really to everybody. And the message is simple. If an American is alive, we are coming for them. And you may not understand how we are finding them. And I think that has a lot of deterrent value. I think it reassures air crews. It also warns adversaries. It burned a little mystery because once you put a code name like that into the bloodstream, you invite countermeasures. You're telling Russia and China that it's out there. And, that's just the trade. That's the trade. Fourth, and this is the strategic layer, recovering that airman really denied Iran something much bigger than a captive. It denied them a major political weapon. A wounded American aviator in Iranian hands would have been instant leverage, instant spectacle, tons of escalation fuel. So this was never just a rescue. It was the prevention of a massive strategic humiliation. So Ghost Murmur, it may be real, it may even be important, but the harder truth is that the public story is probably a distorted silhouette of a much broader, classified recovery architecture, not the whole machine. And the real implication is not the CIA has some kind of magic gadget. The real implication is that the United States is pushing toward a new denied area recovery model, which is built on a lot of fused sensing. And it includes, in this case, deception, a lot of survival technology, and a very fast and very violent extraction. So everything else, I think, is noise until somebody can prove to me that the physics of the Ghost Murmur is legit. I do want to mention that the rescue and the CIA's deception role are all very well supported by the Associated Press and Reuters, but the technical claims about Ghost Murmur are only partially corroborated. And for all I know, they could be exaggerated, they could be simplified, or intentionally distorted for public consumption. See, here's the thing about the CIA is that everybody outside of the CIA thinks the CIA is all-seeing, all-knowing, and is constantly looking over your shoulder. And that's why they get away with it, because the rest of the world thinks that's the case. And I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I'm just saying that's their center of gravity. It's the public's belief that things like the Ghost Murmur exist. Let's move on and talk about Israel and their operations in Lebanon. It's been rather surreal for me watching a lot of these take place because I've spent some time in Beirut. It's a beautiful city. Lebanon in and of itself is a beautiful country. I mean, it's, before a lot of the conflict was there and Hezbollah decided to get their foot in the political infrastructure, it was, it's the pearl of that part of the world. It's beautiful. It's 70% Christian. And I think that ratio is right. I may be off on a little bit, so they have a lot of Western dress. They said they allow alcohol. There's, normal commerce, normal retail, normal mix of, city life that I think you would see anywhere in the world. And it's fantastic. And then I'm watching places that I know be struck by Israeli airstrikes or, missiles. And Israel's clearly not easing off in Lebanon. And quite the contrary, I think they're pressing pretty hard despite the U.S. and Iran ceasefire. They are still treating Lebanon as an active war front. A lot of the latest reporting is saying that Israel claims it killed Hezbollah chief Naam Qassem in an airstrike on Beirut. And that is a major escalation marker. But it is just their claim until it's corroborated by independent sources. Let's treat this one as possible. But they're claiming it. Hezbollah has not confirmed or denied it, so we can't take their word for it either. On the 8th of April, Israel carried out what Reuters and AP described as the heaviest strike wave of this phase of the Lebanon war. They struck more than 100 Hezbollah-linked targets across Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, southern Lebanon, and a lot of the casualty counts are varying by who is saying what. Reuters and Associated Press, however, describe it as the deadliest day of this phase of the conflict, so I think that does bear some weight. Israel is not pretending Lebanon is covered by the Iran pause, clearly. In fact, it is saying just the opposite. And I think a lot of this matters because it tells you this front is being deliberately kept hot, even while American and Iranian diplomats go to Pakistan to try to sort out the rest of this potentially longer ceasefire. This is real on paper, but Lebanon is where that paper is really starting to burn. Why now? Because there's a window. Iran is under a shitload of diplomatic pressure. Washington really needs this truce to survive, and Europe wants calm before a lot of the energy and shipping pressures can even worse than they already are. And Israel appears to be using that gap to force this entirely new military reality in Lebanon before anyone outside can blink, expand the ceasefire, and really just sort of lock the whole battlefield in place. Reuters is reporting that European pressure is building very, very fast, with both the European Union's diplomats, the UK's foreign secretary, both arguing that Lebanon needs to be included in the ceasefire framework. And that is the real move here, because Israel appears to have concluded the old containment model is dead. The UN lines, the diplomatic warnings, the partial deconfliction, all of it's failed to solve the Hezbollah problem on the northern front. And so for Israel, the new method is much uglier and simpler. It's hit command nodes, hit infrastructure, leadership, if you can get them pinned down, but keep pressure on the south of Lebanon and then negotiate later from a position built by force. Reuters is reporting Israeli thinking is increasingly centered on creating that buffer zone between the two countries, pushing a lot of Hezbollah's forces north from Israeli territory. And this implies a couple of things. First, that the regional ceasefire is much thinner than it looks, especially if Lebanon stays outside the deal. The region is not stabilizing. It's really being compartmentalized because one front is cooling just long enough for another front to stay in motion. And there's a lot of room for error because a single miscalculation in either Beirut or southern Lebanon could reconnect the whole war very, very fast. Secondly, Israel is no longer operating just on deterrence alone, which is a model that they had adopted for a very long time. Right now, this is looking a lot more like defense in depth or an enforced forward defense, maybe. Like, instead of saying, don't hit me, now their attitude is, I am going to physically change the battle space so you cannot hit me from here. And that defense in depth, it works strategically. It works operationally and it works tactically. It is a great strategy to have. And, the U.S. has it on a macro scale. It's why we have bases in Guam. It's why we have them in the Philippines, Korea, Germany. You get the idea. Pretty much all over. This, though, can create short-term tactical depth, but it can also create a lot of long-term strategic drag if Israel gets pulled into a much more enduring Lebanon security with a lot of rising in political cost, military and political costs. I think third, that Hezbollah may be under some major pressure. Now, that doesn't mean that they're collapsing, but it does mean they're under a lot of pressure. Even if Israeli claims about Qasem do prove true, decapitation of leadership does not automatically equal strategic defeat. Sometimes it can disrupt command. Sometimes it hardens revenge logic. And although, to be perfectly frank, in Israel's case, I don't know how much more revenge logic you could possibly have. They are surrounded by countries, at least in certain instances, whose entire constitution has the words, kill all the Jews in it. Now, I am not giving a pass to Israel, all right? They will stand history's judgment on their actions, both in Palestine and in Lebanon. I am simply saying that I get it. The need for defense in depth. And I also understand the opposition's feedback loop when it comes to revenge logic. Sometimes it fragments an organization into something less coherent and much more dangerous, though. And that part is a judgment on my part, not a settled outcome, but it is the risk structure sitting underneath all of this escalation. Fourth, this is really costing them diplomatically. The UN is condemning the scale of the Israeli strikes. They always do. And called the casualty reports appalling. European leaders are now openly warning that Lebanon must be covered by the ceasefire if this whole wider truce is to survive. And that means Israel may be gaining operational leverage, but at the same time, they're losing a lot of diplomatic room. I don't think the world has much tolerance for them right now. So I think the bottom line is they're using this moment to press Hezbollah very hard while a lot of diplomatic attention in the room is split. I think the latest reporting suggesting that campaign may now include a direct strike on Hezbollah's leadership in Beirut is legit. Whether or not they actually took that person off the battlefield we'll have to wait and see. If it holds, though, the campaign has moved, like I said, much beyond shaping the southern threat belt and now into a full leadership targeting phase. That raises the odds that Hezbollah and Lebanon become a front where the broader ceasefires have failed. We will see the sourcing on the leadership kill. It's highly consequential and it's not fully independently confirmed in any of the reporting that I checked. The exact political scope of the ceasefire is also contested, which is part of why this situation is extremely unstable. So we're going to keep an eye on this over the next week. I really do hope that the ceasefire between Iran and Washington turns into something that is lasting. I think that there has been enough. I think that the objectives were met, at least insofar as the reduction of forces on the Iranian stockpile. I think that the example that needed to be made was made, which is, the United States and some of our allies will not put up with a state-sponsored of terrorism in perpetuity. That eventually Iran is either going to have to knock this shit off or they're going to pay a heavy price. And I honestly think that the United States did not walk away from this conflict as cleanly as we had hoped. Our allies and us did, there were lives lost. There were many people that were wounded as well on the American side. And it's not a scorecard to determine who the winner is. It has much more impacts than that. But I think there were lessons learned, definitely. And if it manifests itself into a lasting peace, hopefully the United States can then turn those lessons into a new TTP, a tactic, technique, or procedure moving forward in the future. At least insofar as recovery of downed aircraft crew, we've proven that we have a new TTP for that, but that was one pilot. That was one pilot in a very, very low threat environment. So what are we going to do when we go up against a near-peer adversary in a highly contested and denied environment? And we have not just one pilot go down, but let's say 20. I hope it doesn't happen, but hope is not a plan. Speaking about hope, I had a really interesting read on CBS's article when they interviewed General David Petraeus. He came back from Ukraine. He has traveled to Ukraine 10 times. I think this was his 10th. For those of you that are not familiar, David Petraeus was the former CIA director, but he was also a general in charge of some pretty important theaters during his tenure. You can look up his entire bio online. I don't want to run through it here. Never met the man personally, but I've spoken to people that have, and I will keep my opinion about what they had to say about him to myself. But in this instance, he had some fascinating things to say upon his return. He has visited, as I say, Ukraine 10 times since the war began. He has toured both command and control and some frontline units. His most recent trip was last week, three or 4 days ago. I guess technically it's last week. He came back and he was interviewed by CBS, and he had said in the interview specifically, I quote, "Russia no longer has the upper hand in Ukraine," end quote. He said that assessment might have seemed unlikely given Russia's advantage in manpower, firepower, and economic scale. But he argues that Ukraine has offset those disadvantages through its very innovative and remarkably fast unmanned systems. He said that the drone fight is no longer a side issue in modern warfare. It is the fight inside the fight. He is quoted as saying the United States need to learn whole new concepts of warfare from Ukraine, because Ukraine is not winning through size and it's not winning through comfort. It is surviving, and it is surviving by wiring unmanned systems into a very live combat ecosystem of surveillance, targeting, command and control, and strike. And I think that's the point. Not the drone by itself. It's the system around it. What he is really saying, if you paraphrase it, is this: the battlefield is becoming very transparent. Once you are seen, your survival clock starts ticking. Petraeus described a battle space where if a soldier is detected and cannot get underground fast enough, it's probably over. That means you have to change your movement. That means you have to change your camouflage. Your resupply changes. Where you're putting your headquarters, armor use changes. The old idea that you can, mass and pause and sort it out, that's dying in the open. Can't do that anymore. One of the things that I read in the article that I thought was so fascinating is a statement he made that we are, the Army, are talking about giving, 50, 100, 300 drones to an armored unit. And he says, get rid of the armor and just give them drones. It was on a somewhat smaller scale, the same thing that the CEO of Rheinmetall in Germany had told the reporter when mentioning about drone warfare in Ukraine. He brushed it off and dismissed it out of hand as essentially they're playing with Lego. I'm like, bro, you are myopic with that viewpoint. That is an outdated concept. And I think if you can't see what's taking place in Ukraine, then you're kidding yourself, man. Your company makes artillery and tanks that most of the world buys, and it is based off of a paradigm that is dying right in front of us. I mean, there's a reason why the Marine Corps divested itself of armor. It wanted to be faster, fleeter, able to deploy. It is looking to adjust its table of organization and its force posture, and tanks didn't fit into it. I love the M1 Abrams, and I think it brought a lot to the table, but in a symmetrical warfare, open desert, or, you insert name of geography here, it plays. But you saw and have seen and are seeing what is taking place in Ukraine against Russian armored columns. No one's using armor anymore in Ukraine. And what Petraeus is also driving at is something bigger than tactics.
Yeah.
This is the whole conversation that we're having on this subject. War is shifting. It's shifting from platform dominance to systems dominance. The tank, the fighter, the artillery tube, the missile battery. None of that means what it used to mean if it is not fused into a faster loop than the enemy's. You have to find, fix, and finish, and then repeat. That's the cycle of war. And the side that closes that loop first does not just gain an advantage, it writes the tempo of the battle. And then there's some really ugly arithmetic here. Petraeus has been amplifying the point that expensive defenses, interceptors against cheap drones, it's a massive losing business model. And we've talked about it here. That's not a minor procurement problem. If your answer to mass, low-cost threats is premium missiles every time, then the enemy's just going to bleed you with math before he beats you with maneuver. And that is why low-cost interceptor drones and a lot of layered counter-UAS defenses, that's why they matter. They're not optional. They are the price of staying in the fight, and the Ukrainians are proving that in real time. A master class in the future of warfare is taking place. That is why low-cost interceptor drones and layered counter-UAS defenses matter so much. They are not optional. They are the price of staying in the fight, and the institutions are catching up because they have no choice. The U.S. Army has already acknowledged that small drones compress decision-making to mere seconds and make centralized air defense approval processes ineffective at the tactical edge. In fact, NATO currently testing UAS and counter-UAS technologies through its new innovation range in Latvia. All this translates to the bureaucracy has finally noticed the gunfire. Well, with the exception of the CEO of Rheinmetall, apparently. Drone war, it moves too fast for a lot of the old permission chains. Too cheap for old spending logic, and it's too adaptively for static doctrine. And General Petraeus, he's not just describing a gadget revolution. He is describing an institutional judgment day. Militaries built around all of this slow procurement, fragile command hierarchies, and a lot of these exquisite one-off platforms. Looking at you, Uncle Sam, you are staring at obsolescence. Whichever side can adapt faster in software, production, electronic warfare, interceptor design, and tactical authority is going to have the edge. Not because it is more heroic, because it is less slow. And this problem is not localized to Ukraine. That's a lot of what this is about. His line, General Petraeus' line, and the supporting NATO and army response imply that Ukraine is the live fire laboratory for what others are going to face next. The drone cost problem travels. The kill chain problem travels. The autonomy problem travels. What is being learned over Ukrainian trenches and supply routes, they're going to show up in the Middle East and in the Indo-Pacific, and eventually in homeland security planning, whether we like it or not, whether the people on Capitol Hill like it or not. What took place outside of that airport in Texas that shut down that border city for hours is demonstrative of what is going to take place globally with this. The real message is very brutal and very simple. Drone warfare has evolved. It has evolved from a tool into a system, and then from a system into an ecosystem, and from an ecosystem into an entirely new grammar of war. The militaries that adapt are still going to suffer, but the militaries that do not will be watched, mapped, hunted, and dismantled by a lot of cheaper machines moving through tighter loops, not because of, courage on the battlefield. It's because the whole reality has changed, and they were too slow to admit it. In case you're wondering, I did watch Terminator Dark Fate while driving. Yes, I do watch movies while I drive. Thank you, Elon, for making it so I can watch movies while I drive. It did get me on a drone kick. I find that topic fascinating. I know I have talked about it at length, and I'm going to continue to talk about it because what you are seeing is probably the greatest revolution in warfare in modern times. Autonomous systems, undersea, on land, in the air, autonomous systems are going to dominate the battlefield for the foreseeable future. Okay, let me share with you the latest and greatest coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. I know that everyone was hoping that it would be opened. It is sort of. It's sort of open. It is open, but yet it's not. Basically, let me share with you some historical coercion that Iran has used in the past, some maritime weaponization. Let me share with you some of the current war implications. So about 15 hours ago, an Iranian media outlet says the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy has released a chart. I've seen it. It's showing designated routes for passing through the Strait of Hormuz. The chart also shows an area marked danger zone in the middle of the strait. And I don't think it was a shout out to Top Gun. The report says many sea mines have been laid. Here be dragons. And these routes force vessels closer to the Iranian coastline and towards Larak Island for enhanced monitoring, effectively creating a toll booth controlled by Iran. This is the Strait of Hormuz. This is not a side street. This is not background noise. This is one of the world's pressure points. And Iran has spent decades learning how to put its thumb right on the artery. And I want to get something straight right up front. Iran did not suddenly discover the Strait of Hormuz in this war. They did not wake up last week and realize, oh, hey, we sit on one of the most important maritime choke points on Earth. No, this has been baked into their strategic thinking for decades. And this is not the first time that it's happened. This pattern is old and it is deliberate and it is very simple. When Iran is under pressure, it reaches for Hormuz. Not because it wants a fair fight, not because it thinks it can outgun the United States Navy ship for ship, plane for plane, or missile for missile. Over the long haul, it can't. And it knows it can't. Iran uses Hormuz because it is the great equalizer. It is the place where a weaker power, Iran, can reach up and put a hand around the throat of the global economy and say, you want to squeeze us? Fine. Then everybody chokes. And this is the game. If you don't understand that, then you're not understanding Iran. This did not begin with the current regime acting crazy. Not in the modern era. These roots go back actually before the Islamic Republic. Remember, there was a time back in the 70s, 71 specifically, when Iran moved onto Abu Musa and the greater and lesser Tubs. This was not a random real estate drama. That was positional leverage. That was securing ground near the mouth of the Gulf. This was geography turned into future military and political leverage. Fast forward a little bit, you had the Iran-Iraq war. Nice little dust up. That's where Hormuz stopped being a map feature and became a weapons system. During the tanker war in the 1980s, Iran learned something that shaped everything that followed. It learned that you do not have to sink the world's fleet to shake the world's spine. You don't actually have to close the strait airtight. Hell, you don't even have to fire every day. You just have to make ships fear transiting the strait, like they do now. You plant one mine, you hit one tanker, it raises insurance, it drives panic, and it forces all of us to spend blood, time, and money babysitting commerce. And that was the lesson. Very cheap tools. You just happen to have a very narrow waterway with a lot of maximum anxiety. And that right there is how a weaker state fights. At least smarter at a choke point. I mean, did anyone read Gates of Fire? Tehran obviously has, and they've never forgotten it. So after the war, the doctrine evolved. Sometimes it was threats to close the strait if sanctions tightened. Sometimes it was swarming U.S. ships with fast boats. Sometimes it was seizing merchant vessels under the pretense of legal disputes. There's been some sabotage. There's been harassment, a lot of gray zone pressure. All of this sits just below the line of a very clean conventional trigger. And now today we can add another move to the playbook, the toll. And that matters because a toll is not just extortion for cash. A toll is extortion disguised as administration. It is Iran trying to take a tactic of disruption and mature it into a system of control. And that is a completely different level of ambition that we have not seen before. Because really, once you start talking about a toll, you're not just talking about threatening traffic. They're claiming the right to manage the traffic. You're not saying, well, we can hurt this lane. We're saying this lane runs through us now. You pass because we permit it, and you pay because we say so. That's not harassment. That's an attempt to rewrite reality. Same gun, different angle. The method never really changed. Iran weaponizes 6 things in Hormuz. First, geography. They have it. They sit on the North Shore. They have islands. They have coastlines. They have observation points. They have launch points. All of this near the throat of traffic. Second, mines. Folks, mines are cheap and mines are ugly. Mines do not need speeches. A single mine can do a lot of strategic work way beyond its cost. Third thing, swarm tactics. They have a lot of fast boats, a lot of close passes, a lot of ambiguous intent. Enough pressure to force a reaction, but not always enough to justify an immediate full-scale retaliation. Number 4, selective seizure. And this is where a lot of folks get it wrong. They think Iran needs to stop every ship. No, it doesn't. Linda. It doesn't. It just needs to grab a few so that the rest of the market starts sweating. You see, one single ship that is seized speaks to everyone else that is watching. Number 5, tolls. Tolling is where coercion tries to put on a necktie. Because a toll says this is no longer just a threat environment, this is a managed environment. This is not a one-off shakedown. This is an attempt to normalize tribute, pay to pass, coordinate to pass, accept our procedure in order to pass. And that is a huge strategic leap. 6th and last, economic coercion, because the real target here, it's not just the tanker captain. It is the insurer. It's the refiner. It's the energy minister. It is the prime minister, the finance ministry. It is the voter back at home who suddenly sees fuel spikes and supply chains tighten. That's where the shot lands. So let's bring it home and talk about the current conflict. What's happening right now? It's not an isolated outburst. This is a logical endpoint of 40 plus years of Iranian learning. Iran is trying to take temporary disruption and turn it into recognized leverage. It's not a big move, not just threat. It's not just harassment. It's not just done for headlines. It's not just a minefield. It is about control, 100%. Well, more precisely, conditional control or routing control, permission routing control. Nope, it's cost delays. It's delay control. It's a lot of controls. Psychologically, they're winning that game. And if they get this toll control, this is going to be a huge, huge moment. Because if ships are moving only when Iran tolerates it, if they are being funneled, warned, slowed down, inspected, taxed, or in any way politically conditioned, then it's no longer freedom of navigation. You can call it whatever you want. You can dress it up in maritime procedure. You can wrap it in legal language and pretend it's temporary. It's still coercion. And that is the danger here, because I think the world's mistake would be to think this issue is whether Iran can completely close Hormuz forever. And that's the wrong question. The question misses the entire point. What you should be saying or asking is, Iran does not need a perfect blockade. It just needs an imperfect chokehold. It needs enough fear, friction, uncertainty. It needs enough selective passages, at least enough cost or delay or procedural submission that anyone dealing with Gulf energy starts subconsciously accepting this new reality that transit happens because Iran allows it. And that is the strategic prize, because, man, once that principle starts to sink in, even informally, Iran has won something enormous. It has converted geography into diplomatic leverage. It has converted disruption into procedure. It has converted coercion into administration. And with a toll, it tries to convert coercion into revenues too. And that's not even the main point. I mean, the main point is just recognition. It says to the world, you are not just afraid of us, you are complying with us. If the world accepts this, then it is not just losing an argument with Iran, it is teaching every revisionist state on earth that global choke points can be monetized, politicized, and conditionally administered by force. It's not just the straits. There's a lot of choke points that are there, which is why that lesson is not going to stay in Hormuz. Now, from a military standpoint, reopening the strait is not some clean little freedom of navigation photo op. This is not a war movie transit. This is mine countermeasures, a lot of ISR, escort duty, suppression of shore threats, drone defense, a small boat defense, a lot of layered maritime security, and constant escalation management in a very tight waterway. It is slow, it is ugly, and it is one bad decision away from becoming bigger than anyone planned. Economically, the damage starts long before total closure. I would fall back on some of the stuff that I have read in the last couple of weeks about the volume of ships that transit through. And I've mentioned this on previous SITREPs, anywhere from 120 to 150 ships a day are passing through that. And I'm not talking about small pleasure yachts. These are big. We don't have the Navy to escort them through. We do not have the assets. This is a full-time mission, not just for the United States, but for anyone that has skin in the game. So this is the other thing that people are getting wrong. It's not just physical denial, it's fear. And it's fear priced into movement. With the tolling, the weapon becomes a lot of institutionalized friction. We've talked about insurance rising. We have talked about shipping costs rise. A lot of markets will tighten. And when that happens, a lot of governments panic. A lot of importers are going to now start looking for alternatives, but they're not out there at the scale that we want. You almost inevitably have to go through this waterway. And so everyone is going to have to pay for uncertainty. And if that tolling sticks, well, now you're paying for submission too. Yeah, that's Iranian victory in a conventional sense. We'll see if it sticks. This is securing the geography. They're doing it. They're doing it now. Exploiting a lot of legal gray zones. And markets they're seeing the shock. Now, if possible, stand up a toll booth in the middle of a global artery. You're basically daring the world to call it what it is. That's how they have weaponized Hormuz. In this current conflict right now with Iran, that doctrine has matured into its most dangerous form yet. The attempt to turn a waterway disruption into a normalized control. I am really interested to see if this war ends with Hormuz restored as an open international artery, or whether it ends with Iran effectively sitting at a toll booth with a rifle under the table. If the answer is the second one, the fighting may slow down, but the damage is already done. Well, I think based off of my glass being empty, it's water, still empty. Usually coincides with the end of my show, and tonight is no exception. So I've enjoyed bringing a bit of news and events and how you are impacted by all of the above to you. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. Until next time, this is me, Brad Colbert, the Iceman, reminding all of you to stay frosty. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby and get ourselves a treat.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome.